The sun hadn't even crested the Pacific horizon yet, but at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, the day was already roaring to life. Waves crashed against the shore just beyond the fence line, but inside the compound there was no time to admire the view. Men, mostly in their early 20s, lean and wired with nervous energy, ran in tight formation, boots pounding the asphalt, voices hoarse from shouting cadence. Sweat soaked through their uniforms before breakfast. This was Bud's training, basic underwater demolition SEAL, and it was designed to break people down so only the strongest, toughest, and most resilient would remain. Near the edge of the training yard, just outside the main gate but close enough to see everything, stood an old man. He wasn't in uniform. He wore faded khaki pants, scuffed work boots, and a thin windbreaker that flapped slightly in the ocean breeze. His skin was dark, weathered by decades of sun and wind, and his hair was close-cropped and mostly gray. He didn't pace or fidget. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching. Most of the recruits didn't notice him at first. Those who did barely gave him a second glance. To them, he was just another civilian, maybe a local who liked to watch the chaos, maybe someone waiting for a ride. A few snickered when they passed by during sprints. "Yo, check out Grandpa," one panted between breaths. "Think he's here to sign up?" Another laughed. "Man's probably looking for the senior center." Wrong turn by about 10 miles. The old man didn't react. He didn't glare, didn't shake his head, didn't even shift his weight. He just kept watching, eyes steady, expression unreadable. There was something about the way he held himself, back straight, shoulders relaxed but not slouched, that didn't quite fit the image of a lost retiree. But no one stopped to think about it. They were too busy surviving the next evolution, the next drill instructor's bark, the next wave of exhaustion. Except one. A recruit near the back of the pack had noticed the man earlier that morning during the pre-dawn log PT. While others groaned under the weight of the heavy wooden logs, this young man's eyes kept drifting toward the fence. Something about the quiet figure felt off, not in a suspicious way, but in a way that tugged at his gut. He'd grown up around veterans, his uncle, his grandfather, and he knew the difference between someone who just looked old and someone who carried silence like armor. During a rare 5-minute break later that day, while the rest of the class guzzled water and tried to catch their breath under the shade of a lean-to, the recruit stole another glance. The old man was still there, and this time, as a gust of wind lifted the sleeve of his jacket just slightly, the recruit saw it. A tattoo. Faded, yes. Time and sun had softened its edges, but unmistakable. On the inside of the man's forearm, just below the rolled-up sleeve, was the outline of a trident. Not just any trident, the U.S. Navy SEAL trident, the same one every man in that compound was fighting tooth and nail to earn. The same one that once pinned to your chest meant you'd made it through hell and back. The recruit froze, water bottle halfway to his lips. His heart thudded, not from exhaustion this time, but from realization. That tattoo wasn't something you bought at a shop or got on a dare. You earned it. Through blood, ice-cold ocean swims, sleepless nights, and more pain than most people could imagine, and you only got it if you'd served, with honor, as a Navy SEAL. He looked around, expecting someone else to have noticed, but no one had. They were too busy complaining about blisters or comparing how many push-ups they'd failed that morning. No one was looking at the quiet man by the fence. The recruit hesitated. Protocol said civilians weren't supposed to linger near active training zones, but this didn't feel like a normal civilian. Swallowing hard, he walked over, slowly, respectfully, keeping a few feet of distance. "Excuse me, sir," he said, voice rough from hours of yelling. "Were you in the teams?" The old man turned his head slightly. His eyes, deep brown, calm as still water, met the recruit's. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a voice like gravel wrapped in velvet, he answered. Once just one word, but it carried weight. History, pain, pride. The recruit didn't press. He just nodded. "Thank you for your service, sir." The old man gave the faintest nod in return, then turned his gaze back to the training yard, where another group of recruits was now crawling through mud under the watchful eyes of instructors. He watched them like a man watching ghosts, maybe of his younger self, maybe of friends long gone. Back with his platoon, the recruit tried to focus, but his mind kept circling back to that tattoo. He mentioned it quietly to the guy next to him during chow. You see that old man by the gate? He's got a real trident, his teammate snorted. Nah, man. Probably some fanboy who got inked after watching a movie. Happens all the time. But the recruit knew better. He'd seen the way the man stood. The way his eyes tracked every movement on the field. Not with curiosity, but with recognition. Like he'd lived every second of it. Over the next few days, the old man kept showing up. Always at the same spot. Always silent. Always watching. Some of the other recruits started noticing him too. But instead of respect, they doubled down on jokes. Hey, old-timer. You here to teach us how to nap? One called out during a run. Laughter followed. The old man didn't flinch, but the recruit who'd seen the tattoo began to feel a quiet anger simmering inside him. Not at his classmates, they didn't know, but at the blindness of it all. Here was a man who'd likely walked through fire so that they could even have the chance to stand where they stood. And they were treating him like a punchline. One evening, after a brutal day of surf torture and sand runs, the recruit stayed behind as the others shuffled off to the barracks. He walked slowly toward the fence. The old man was still there, silhouetted against the orange-pink sky. Why do you come here, sir? The recruit asked, not expecting an answer. The old man was quiet for a long time. Then he said, to remember, and to see if you boys remember too. Remember what? What it costs. He didn't say more. But the recruit understood. This place wasn't just about physical strength. It was about legacy, sacrifice, brotherhood. And somewhere along the way, in their rush to prove themselves, they'd forgotten to look up and see who'd paved the road they were running on. As the recruit turned to leave, the old man added almost as an afterthought, "You've got heart. Don't let the noise drown it out." The words stayed with him long after the sun went down, and though no one else knew it yet, everything was about to change, not because of a speech or a medal, but because of a tattoo, a quiet nod, and the unshakable dignity of a man who asked for nothing, but deserved everything. The next morning started like every other, cold, wet, and loud. Fog hung low over the beach as the recruits lined up for surf immersion. They'd already been awake for 3 hours, soaked to the bone, shivering not just from the ocean but from exhaustion that had settled deep into their bones. No one talked much. Words took energy they didn't have, but something felt different. As they jogged past the chain-link fence on their way to the water, more than a few eyes flicked toward the spot where the old man usually stood. He was there again, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. Only now the jokes had stopped. Not because anyone had been told to shut up, but because the recruit who'd spoken to him the night before couldn't keep what he'd seen to himself. He's got the real trident, he'd whispered to a couple of guys during chow the evening before. Not a fake one. The real deal. At first they'd rolled their eyes, but then he described the tattoo, the way it sat just below the elbow, the slight blur from age, the way the anchor and eagle were worn but still sharp in the right light. One of them, a guy who'd grown up near Norfolk and whose dad had served on a destroyer, went quiet. "My old man said you don't just get that ink unless you've earned it," he muttered. "And even then, most SEALs don't wear it on their arm like that. Too proud, too sacred." That was enough to plant a seed. Now as they passed the fence, the silence wasn't mocking, it was uneasy, curious, respectful, even if they didn't fully understand why yet. The old man didn't seem to notice the shift. Or maybe he did, and just chose not to show it. Later that day, during a rare lull between evolutions, the recruit who'd first spoken to him found himself standing near the fence again. This time he wasn't alone. 2 others had followed, hanging back a few steps, watching. The old man turned slightly as if sensing their presence. Without a word, he rolled up his left sleeve just enough to reveal the tattoo again, fully this time. The trident was there, yes, but so was something else. A small, simple cross beneath it, and the faded outline of a unit patch, Team 2. The ink was old, the lines softened by time, but the meaning was clear as daylight. One of the other recruits sucked in a breath. That's Vietnam era," he said quietly. "I saw one like that in a museum." The old man didn't confirm or deny. He just let his sleeve fall back into place and looked out at the training field, where a group of instructors were putting another platoon through boat drills. "You boys think you're tired," he said, voice low. "Try doing this in a jungle with leeches in your boots and no radio." No one laughed. No one even smiled. They just stood there, suddenly aware that the pain they were feeling, the cold, the hunger, the doubt, was nothing compared to what men like him had endured. Word spread fast after that. By lunch, half the platoon was talking about the old man. Not in whispers anymore, but with a kind of hushed awe. Someone asked a senior instructor if he knew who the guy was. The instructor didn't answer directly, just gave a slow nod and said, "Treat him like you'd treat your granddad. If your granddad could kill you with a spoon." That was all it took. From then on, whenever the old man showed up, the recruits straightened their posture. Some even gave a quiet "Good morning, sir," as they passed. He never demanded it, never asked for attention, but the respect came anyway, because now they saw him not as a stranger, but as someone who'd walked the path they were just beginning. One afternoon, during a recovery period under the hot California sun, the recruit who'd first noticed the tattoo sat down near the fence, a safe distance away but close enough to talk if the old man wanted to. For a while neither spoke. Just the sound of waves, distant shouts from the obstacle course, and the hum of helicopters overhead. Finally, the old man broke the silence. "You ever wonder why they let me stand here?" he asked. The recruit shook his head. "I figured you had permission, or maybe you just showed up so long they stopped asking." A faint smile touched the old man's lips. "I come here every few years. Not for glory, not for thanks. I come because this place, it's where I lost my best friend. Right over there." He pointed toward the beach where the surf pounded the shore. Monsoon season. We were doing night recon. He stepped on a punji stake, bamboo sharpened, dipped in crap to make it rot you from the inside. By the time we got him out, he was burning up. Died in the medevac chopper. Never made it home. The recruit didn't know what to say, so he just listened. "I come back to remember him," the old man continued, "and to see if the next generation still has what it takes. Not just muscle, heart, guts, the kind that doesn't quit when no one's watching." He paused, then added, "You've got that. I saw it the first day." The recruit felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected that. He'd been struggling more than he let on, doubting if he belonged here, if he was strong enough, if he'd make it through Hell Week. Hearing those words from someone who'd actually been through real hell, it meant more than any pep talk from an instructor. Later that evening, during a rare moment of quiet in the barracks, the recruit told the story to his platoon. Not to impress them, but because he thought they should know that the man they'd laughed at was carrying wounds they couldn't see. Memories heavier than any log they'd carried. After that, everything changed. When the old man walked by, recruits would snap to a subtle version of attention. Not full military stance, but shoulders back, eyes forward, chins up. Some even started leaving a water bottle near the fence for him, though he never took it. Others would nod as they passed, not saying a word, but saying everything with that small gesture. One instructor noticed the shift and pulled the recruit aside. "You started this," he said, not unkindly. "Good. They needed to learn that respect isn't just for the living who wear the trident. It's for the ones who paved the way, and the ones who never made it back to wear it at all." The old man stayed for 3 more days. He never gave a speech, never told war stories for entertainment. But his presence alone became a lesson, a quiet reminder that courage isn't always loud and heroes don't always wear capes, or even uniforms. On his last morning, he stood at the fence longer than usual. The sun was rising, painting the sky in gold and pink. The recruits were lining up for morning PT, and as they passed, each one gave a small nod. The old man returned it one by one. Then he turned and walked away, slowly, steadily, down the road, his shadow stretching long behind him. No one clapped. No one shouted. But as he disappeared around the bend, the entire platoon stood a little taller, because they finally understood. The trident wasn't just a badge. It was a promise, and somewhere along the way, a quiet old man had reminded them what that promise really meant. A few days after the old man disappeared from the fence line, the recruits were still talking about him. Not in hushed whispers anymore, but with a kind of quiet reverence that hadn't been there before. The jokes were gone. In their place was something heavier, something like responsibility. Like they'd been handed a baton they didn't even know they were supposed to carry. One evening, after another grueling day of log carries, ocean swims, and sand-filled boots, a senior instructor called the platoon together under the dim yellow lights of the barracks yard. He wasn't one for long speeches. Most of his lessons came in the form of push-ups or icy ocean dips. But tonight, he looked different. Softer somehow. "You've all seen the man by the fence," he said, arms crossed, voice low. Some of you laughed. Some of you looked away. One of you had the sense to pay attention. He paused, letting the words sink in. No one moved. "That man," the instructor continued, "is Chief Petty Officer Elijah Hayes. He joined the Navy in 1959. In 1962, he became one of the first black men ever selected for SEAL training. Back then, this country didn't even let black and white kids go to the same schools in half the states. But the Navy needed warriors, and Hayes proved he was one, no matter what anyone said." A few recruits exchanged glances. They'd guessed he was a veteran, maybe even a SEAL, but they hadn't known the full story. "He served with SEAL Team 2 during the worst years of Vietnam," the instructor went on. "Jungle patrols, river ambushes, rescues behind enemy lines. He lost more brothers than most of you have had hot meals since you got here. And he never complained. Never asked for special treatment. Just did his job and did it better than most." Someone asked, "Is he still in the service?" The instructor shook his head. "Retired in 78. Spent years after that working with veterans, mentoring kids in rough neighborhoods, helping former teammates who came home broken. Never took credit. Never gave interviews. Just lived his life like it was nobody's business but his own." Another recruit spoke up, voice tentative. "Why'd he come here?" The instructor looked out toward the fence as if expecting to see Hayes standing there again. "Because this place matters to him. Not for the glory. Not for the cameras. But because every man who earns that trident stands on the shoulders of guys like him. Guys who fought not just the enemy, but the system, the doubt, the silence." He turned back to the group. "You think Bud S is hard? Try doing it when half your own country thinks you don't belong in uniform. Try earning respect when your own chain of command looks at you like you're a mistake. Hayes didn't just survive that. He thrived. And he never let bitterness take root. That's real strength." The platoon stood in silence. The ocean breeze rustled the palm trees overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter thumped through the night sky. Later in the barracks, the recruits talked in low voices. One pulled out his phone and, after a quick search, found a grainy black and white photo from a Navy archive. A young sailor, crisp uniform, sharp eyes, standing beside a group of men in 1963. The caption read, "SEAL Team 2, Vietnam Deployment, CPO Elijah Hayes, far right." They passed the phone around. It was hard to believe that the quiet man in the windbreaker was once that sharp, that young, that fearless. Another recruit remembered something. He said his friend died on the beach, he murmured. During a night op, the instructor had confirmed it the next day. Hayes's best friend, a fellow SEAL named Danny Ruiz, had stepped on a booby-trapped stake during a monsoon-soaked patrol in the Mekong Delta. Hayes carried him 2 miles through waist-deep, water and enemy fire to reach the extraction point. Ruiz didn't make it, but Hayes stayed with him the whole way, holding his hand until the medevac lifted off. "He never talks about it," the instructor had said, "but every time he comes back here, he walks that stretch of beach alone." Now the weight of that hit them harder. This wasn't just about tattoos or old uniforms. It was about loyalty, about carrying your brothers, even when there's nothing left to carry but memory. The next morning, during surf torture, something changed. When one recruit stumbled and went under, 2 others didn't wait for orders. They dove in and pulled him up. When another started lagging during the run, someone fell back to pace with him. No one shouted. No one complained. They just did it, because they finally understood. Being a SEAL wasn't just about being the toughest guy in the room. It was about making sure no one got left behind. Ever. That afternoon, during a rare break, the recruit who'd first spoken to Hayes sat on the sand, staring out at the ocean. He thought about what it must have been like, serving in a war where your own country didn't fully accept you, losing your closest friend, coming home to silence instead of parades, and still choosing to show up decades later, not for thanks, but just to watch and hope. He pulled out a small notebook he kept in his pocket, something his grandfather had given him before he left home. On a blank page, he wrote, "Courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's just showing up." He didn't know if he'd ever see Hayes again. But he knew one thing for sure. If he made it through this training, if he ever earned that trident, he'd carry Hayes's story with him. Not as a legend, but as a reminder. Because real heroes don't need statues. They don't need headlines. Sometimes they just stand by a fence in worn-out boots watching the next generation try to become what they once were. And sometimes that's enough. Days turned into weeks. Hell Week came and went, a blur of ice water, sleepless nights, and sheer willpower. Some dropped out. Others pushed through, fueled by something deeper than pride. And through it all, the memory of the quiet old man stayed with them, not as a ghost, but as a guide. One night, long after lights out, someone whispered into the dark, "Do you think he knows we made it through?" Another voice answered softly, "I think he always knew we could." And in that moment, under the same stars that had watched over Hayes decades before, the line between past and present blurred. The legacy wasn't in medals or missions. It was in the choice to keep going, even when no one's watching. Especially then, that was the lesson Hayes had left behind, and it was one they'd never forget. The days after Hell Week felt different. Not easier exactly, but sharper, like the world had come into focus. The recruits moved with a new kind of purpose. They still cursed the cold ocean, still groaned under the weight of logs, still ached in places they didn't know could ache. But something inside them had shifted. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to be worthy. And then, just when they thought the old man was gone for good, he showed up again. It was during night swim training, a brutal evolution where the ocean was black, the water near freezing, and the only light came from distant buoys and the instructor's flashlights. One recruit had hit a wall. His strokes were slowing, his breathing ragged. He wasn't quitting, he just couldn't find the rhythm anymore. Fear had crept in, quiet and cold, whispering that maybe he wasn't cut out for this after all. Then, from the dock, a voice cut through the dark. "Fear don't drown you. Quitting does." The recruit turned his head, treading water, and saw him, standing at the edge of the pier, hands in his pockets, just like before. The old man didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Those 6 words landed like stones in still water, rippling through the recruit's chest. He took a deep breath, kicked harder, and kept swimming. After the evolution ended and the platoon huddled on the beach, shivering and exhausted, the old man didn't leave right away. For the first time he walked onto the sand, just a few steps, but enough to be among them, not just outside looking in. No one spoke. They just watched, dripping wet, wrapped in their own thoughts. Then he said, "You think you're tired? Good, means you're pushing. But remember, this ain't about how strong your arms are. It's about what's in here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "That's what keeps you going when your body says stop." One of the younger recruits, barely 20, found the courage to ask, "Sir, how'd you keep going back then? In Vietnam?" The old man looked out at the ocean for a long moment. The waves rolled in, steady and endless. "I didn't do it for medals," he said finally. "Didn't do it for glory. I did it for the man next to me. You lose that, you lose everything." He paused, then added, "I lost a brother out there. Not blood, but closer than most family. We'd made a promise, no matter what, we'd get each other home. When he went down, I carried him. Not because I thought I could save him, but because I owed him that much." His voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. The pain was there, quiet and deep, like an old scar that still ached in the rain. "You'll make promises like that," he told them, to each other. To yourselves, keep them, even when it's hard. Especially then. He didn't stay long after that, just long enough to watch them file off toward the barracks, shoulders a little straighter, eyes a little clearer. But before he left, he stopped beside the recruit who'd struggled in the water. "You've got it in you," he said. "Don't let doubt steal it." That night, in the barracks, no one joked. No one complained about sore muscles or cold sheets. They just lay there thinking about promises, about brothers, about what it really meant to earn the right to wear that trident. Over the next few weeks, the old man came by less often, but when he did, it meant something. Sometimes he'd just stand and watch boat drills. Other times he'd offer a single word of advice. Breathe. Stay low. Trust your gut. Never more than that. He wasn't there to teach tactics. He was there to remind them of the soul behind the skill. One afternoon, during land navigation training in the hills outside Coronado, the same recruit who'd first noticed the tattoo found himself lost, not in the woods, but in his own head. He'd missed a checkpoint, fallen behind, and the weight of failure pressed down on him like a rucksack full of rocks. He sat on a log, head in his hands, wondering if he should just ring out. Then he heard footsteps. He looked up. The old man stood a few yards away, not saying anything, just watching. After a moment, he walked over and sat on the other end of the log. "You ever get lost?" the recruit asked quietly. "Plenty of times," the old man said. "In jungles, in cities, in my own mind." "Getting lost don't mean you're done. It just means you gotta find your way back." "How? Remember why you started?" The recruit thought about that. He hadn't joined for fame or adventure. He'd joined because he wanted to be part of something bigger than himself. Because he believed in service, in sacrifice, in standing beside people who'd do the same for him. He stood up, adjusted his pack, and checked his compass again. "Thanks, sir," the old man nodded. "You'll make it." And somehow the recruit believed him. As graduation drew closer, the platoon began to feel like a family, bruised, exhausted, but bound together by something words couldn't fully capture. They'd carried each other through mud, ice, and doubt. And through it all, the quiet presence of the old man had been a kind of anchor. A reminder that this path they were on had been walked before, by men who'd faced far worse and still chose to stand tall. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the old man stood by the fence one last time. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to. But as the platoon passed by after dinner, each man slowed just slightly, gave a nod, or touched a hand to his chest in silent thanks. The old man returned the gesture, one by one, and in that moment no words were needed. The lesson had been passed, not through speeches or ceremonies, but through respect, through attention, through the simple act of seeing someone for who they really were. Later that night, the recruit wrote in his notebook again, "Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear old windbreakers and stand by fences waiting for someone to notice." He didn't know if he'd ever see the old man again, but he knew this. If he ever earned that trident, he'd wear it not just for himself, but for the man who'd shown him what it truly meant to be a SEAL. Not through noise, but through silence. Not through pride, but through humility. And that, more than anything, was worth remembering.